My name is Morrison, and I've built my reputation on being absolutely terrifying. In the corporate world of international finance, my name alone could make junior analysts break into a cold sweat. I was the kind of director who didn't tolerate excuses, didn't accept mediocrity, and certainly didn't do sentimentality. My teams delivered results because failure simply wasn't an option I entertained. When I walked into a conference room, conversation stopped. When I spoke, people listened, and when I made a decision, it was final. That's why the letter sitting on my desk felt like a personal insult. Immigration status under review, failure to provide adequate documentation by November 15th will result in immediate deportation proceedings. I'd read it 3 times, each reading making my jaw clench tighter. My work visa, which should have been a straightforward renewal, had somehow gotten tangled in bureaucratic red tape, something about discrepancies in my application missing forms, processing delays. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that I had exactly 12 days to fix this, or everything I'd built over the past 7 years would evaporate. I was packing behind my desk, the Manhattan skyline stretching behind me through floor-to-ceiling windows, when my office door opened. "Blake, I have the quarterly reports you." Tristan stopped mid-sentence, his hand still on the doorknob. "Are you okay?" Tristan Hayes had been my executive assistant for 2 years. Unlike the revolving door of assistants I'd churned through before him, he'd actually stuck around. He was competent, efficient, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate what I needed before I asked for it. He was also annoyingly perceptive. "I'm fine," I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Tristan was one of the few people who didn't deserve my anger. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You're packing. You never pace unless something's seriously wrong." I stopped, turning to face him. Tristan was younger than me by about 5 years, putting him in his late 20s. He had that effortlessly put-together look. Neat dark hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Today, he wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, though I tried not to notice such things. "Visa issues," I said, curtly, gesturing to the letter. "Apparently, I'm about to be deported." His expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What? That's impossible. You've been here for years. You're a permanent fixture of this company. Tell that to Immigration Services." I ran a hand through my hair, a rare display of frustration. "My lawyer says the appeal process will take months." "I don't have months. I have 12 days. Tristan moved closer, picking up the letter to read it himself. I watched his eyes scan the bureaucratic language, his brow furrowing. "There has to be something we can do." "What did your lawyer suggest?" "Getting married to a citizen would solve it immediately," I said with a bitter laugh. "But unless you know someone willing to enter into a sham marriage with their terrifying boss, that option's off the table." The silence that followed was strange. I looked at Tristan and found him staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I could do it," he said quietly. "What?" "Marry you. I'm a citizen. It would solve your problem." His voice was steady, matter of fact, as if he just offered to grab me coffee instead of proposing we commit immigration fraud together. I stared at him. "That's insane, is it?" He set the letter down, crossing his arms. "You need to stay in the country. I can help you stay in the country. We work together every day anyway. We know each other's schedules, habits, preferences. We could make it convincing." "Tristan, think about it practically, Blake. You've built your entire career here. You have projects worth millions in development. Walking away now would destroy everything you've worked for." He paused, then added more softly, "And honestly, I can't imagine this office without you." There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him differently. Tristan had always been professional, always maintained appropriate boundaries, but in that moment I wondered if there was more beneath the surface. "This could get us both in serious trouble," I said, but even as I spoke I was considering it. "Only if we get caught." He managed a small smile. "And you don't do failure. Remember?" 5 days later we sat in a sterile immigration office facing Officer Williams, a woman whose skeptical expression suggested she'd seen every scam in the book. Tristan and I had spent the past few days preparing. we'd memorize details about each other. Birthdays, favorite foods, childhood memories we'd supposedly shared. We'd taken photos together, doctored metadata to make them look older. We'd even opened a joint bank account and moved some of Tristan's belongings into my penthouse apartment. So, Officer Williams began flipping through our application. You two have been together for 3 years, 2.5, Tristan corrected smoothly, reaching over to take my hand. His palm was warm against mine. We started dating about 6 months after I began working as Blake's assistant. Romantic, she said dryly, and Mr. Morrison, you never mentioned this relationship in any of your previous visa applications. I prefer to keep my personal life private, I said, keeping my voice level. My relationship status didn't seem relevant to my work visa. Convenient that it becomes relevant now, just when you're facing deportation. She made a note on her pad. Tell me, where did you two have your first date? A small Italian restaurant in the village, I said, Luda's. What did you order? She asked, looking at Tristan. He didn't miss a beat. Blake had the osso buco, I had the carbonara. We shared a bottle of Chianti and argued about whether the Mets or the Yankees were the superior team. Who won the argument? Neither, I interjected. We agreed to disagree. It's become our thing. Officer Williams looked between us, her expression unreadable. Mr. Hayes, what side of the bed does Mr. Morrison sleep on? The right, Tristan answered immediately. He says it's because he likes to be closer to the door, but really it's because the right nightstand has the outlets for his phone charger and reading lamp. And what does Mr. Morrison typically wear to bed? Tristan's cheeks colored slightly, a nice touch that seemed genuine, usually just boxes, navy blue ones. Mostly, sometimes gray. It was true, we'd planned for these kinds of invasive questions, but hearing Tristan describe my sleeping habits with such casual intimacy felt oddly exposing. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Officer Williams probed every aspect of our supposed relationship, looking for inconsistencies. When had we decided to get married? Why the sudden rush? What did our families think? We had answers for everything. But I could see she wasn't convinced. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at us both. Gentlemen, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen countless couples who think they can game the system, and I have to tell you, something about your story doesn't add up. My stomach tightened. Beside me, I felt Tristan's hand grip mine harder. However, she continued, I can't definitively prove you're lying, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to approve a conditional visa for Mr. Morrison, valid for 2 weeks. During that time, you two are going to live together as a married couple. At the end of those 2 weeks, you'll return here for a follow-up interview. If I'm still not convinced your marriage is genuine, I'll have grounds to deny the application and proceed with deportation. Do you understand? Yes, we both said in unison. I'll be checking in, she warned. Unannounced visits, random calls. If you're running a scam, I will find out, and the penalties for immigration fraud are severe for both parties. We left the office in silence, not speaking until we were in the back of my car. That was close, Tristan said quietly. Too close. I loosened my tie, feeling the tension of the past hour settling into my shoulders. She's going to be watching us like a hawk, then we'd better make it convincing. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. Blake, there's something I need to tell you. My grandmother's 80th birthday is this weekend in Canada. I already told her I'd be there, so cancel, I said immediately. I can't, she's Blake, she's not in great health. This might be her last birthday. He took a breath. And if we're supposed to be married, it would look suspicious if I went alone. Officer Williams might check. I stared at him. You want me to go to Canada to meet your grandmother in the middle of this disaster? I know it's not ideal, but think about it. What better way to prove our relationship is real than to show we're integrated into each other's families? Plus, it gets us out of the city for a few days, less chance of Officer Williams doing one of her surprise visits if we have a legitimate reason to be away. He had a point. Damn him. Fine, I said finally, but we're not staying long. 2 days maximum, Tristan smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him in days. Thank you, she's going to love you. I seriously doubted that. 3 days later, we were on a flight to Toronto, then a small commuter plane to a regional airport I'd never heard of. From there, Tristan rented a car for the drive to what he described as a small town in cottage country. I'd expected something quaint, maybe slightly rustic. What I got was a place so small it barely qualified as a town, a handful of buildings clustered around a lake, surrounded by dense forests that seemed to stretch forever. The autumn colors were at their peak, the trees a riot of reds and golds that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so stressed about everything else. "This is where you grew up?" I asked as Tristan navigated the rental car down a winding road. "Until I was 18, he confirmed. "Then I moved to Toronto for university and eventually to New York, but Gran stayed." She says the city makes her nervous. "I can't imagine you living in a place like this." He glanced at me, a hint of amusement in his expression. "Why? Because I seem too sophisticated." "Because there's probably more deer than people." "There are definitely more deer than people," he agreed, "but it was a good place to grow up. Everyone knows everyone, there's a real sense of community, it's peaceful." I couldn't remember the last time I'd experienced peace. My life was defined by deadlines, pressure, constant motion. The idea of living somewhere this quiet seemed almost alien. We pulled up to a small house with a wraparound porch painted white with green shutters. Flower boxes still held the last blooms of autumn, and a wind chime made of driftwood hung near the door, producing gentle tones in the breeze. Before we could get out, the front door opened and an elderly woman stepped onto the porch. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a bun and bright eyes that immediately found Tristan. "There's my boy," she called out, a voice stronger than I expected. Tristan was out of the car in seconds, bounding up the porch steps to embrace her. I followed more slowly, suddenly aware that I was meeting someone important, someone who would expect me to be her grandson's husband. "Gran, this is Blake," Tristan said, keeping one arm around her shoulders. "Blake, my grandmother, Margaret Hayes." "Mrs. Hayes," I said, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She ignored my hand and pulled me into a hug instead. For such a small woman, she had a surprisingly strong grip. "Call me Gran." "Everyone does," she said, pulling back to look at me with sharp, assessing eyes. "So you're the man who finally got my Tristan to settle down." I was beginning to think he'd married his work. "That makes two of us," I said, without thinking, then wondered if I should have been more romantic. But Gran just laughed. "A workaholic marrying a workaholic, that'll either be a disaster or the best thing that ever happened to both of you." She patted my arm. "Come inside, I made dinner." Tristan grabbed the bags. The inside of the house was exactly what I expected. Cozy, cluttered with the accumulation of decades and smelling of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Photographs covered nearly every surface, chronicling what I assumed was the Hayes family history. "That's Tristan at his high school graduation," Gran said, noticing me looking at a photo of a younger, gangly version of my assistant in a cap and gown, top of his class. "Always was brilliant, that one." "Still is," I said and meant it. Over dinner, a pot roast that melted in my mouth. Gran asked questions. Unlike Officer Williams, her interrogation felt genuine, coming from a place of interest rather than suspicion. She wanted to know how we met, what our life in New York was like, whether we were happy. Tristan handled most of the answers, spinning our fake relationship into something that sounded almost real. And maybe it was the wine or the warmth of the house, or the way Gran looked at her grandson with such obvious love, but I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Never talks about his family," Tristan said at one point. "It's been one of the few things he won't share with me." Gran turned those sharp eyes on me. "Everyone has a family story, Blake, even if it's not a happy one." I set down my fork, not sure how to respond. The truth was, I rarely thought about my family. My parents had been wealthy but emotionally distant, more interested in their social standing than in their son. I'd learned early that the only person I could rely on was myself. "My parents and I aren't close," I said finally. "We don't really speak anymore." "That must be lonely," Gran said softly. Simple observation hit harder than I expected. "I suppose it is." I Admitted, but I learned to be independent, it made me stronger, or harder, she suggested not unkindly. There's a difference between strength and walls, Blake. One protects you, the other isolates you. I didn't have an answer for that. After dinner, Tristan showed me to the guest room, which had only one bed. I noticed, of course it did, we were supposed to be married. I can sleep on the floor, Tristan offered quietly. Don't be ridiculous. We're adults, we can share a bed. That night, lying in the darkness with Tristan a careful distance away, I found myself thinking about what Gran had said about walls and isolation, about the difference between being strong and being alone. Blake, Tristan's voice was soft in the darkness. Are you awake? Yeah, thank you for doing this, for coming here. I know it's not your thing. It's fine, I said, though I wasn't sure if it was. My grandmother is pretty perceptive. If she suspects we're not really together, we'll convince her, I said with more confidence than I felt. We've made it this far. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices from the kitchen. For a moment I was disoriented. This wasn't my penthouse, wasn't my bed. Then I remembered Canada. Gran's house. Tristan, who wasn't in the bed anymore, I found him in the kitchen with Gran, both of them working on what appeared to be preparations for a major cooking operation. The counter was covered with ingredients: flour, eggs, sugar, various spices I couldn't identify. Morning, Tristan said, looking up with a smile. Coffee's fresh. What's all this? I asked, pouring myself a cup. Birthday cake, Gran explained. Tradition in this family, you make your own birthday cake. But I'm getting old, so Tristan helps. You're not old, Gran, Tristan protested. 80 is old, sweetheart, but I've earned it. She turned to me. Blake, you any good in the kitchen? I can make toast, I offered. She laughed. Well, you can be our taste tester then. Come on, Tristan needs to show you how to crack an egg properly. What followed was probably the most domestic hour of my life. Under Gran's direction and Tristan's patient instruction, I actually helped make a cake. I cracked eggs, only getting a few pieces of shell in the bowl, measured flour, getting most of it in the bowl rather than on the counter, and even attempted to fold in the chocolate chips without deflating the batter. Not bad for a first-timer, Tristan said, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him beside me. I had a good teacher, I replied. Then realized how that sounded like something a husband might actually say to his partner. Gran watched us with a small smile but didn't comment. People started arriving around noon. It seemed like the entire town had turned out for Gran's birthday. They came bearing casseroles and salads and desserts, filling the small house with noise and warmth and life. I was introduced to what felt like hundreds of people: neighbors, old friends, distant relatives. Everyone seemed to know Tristan, had some story about him as a child or teenager, and everyone wanted to meet his new husband. Blake, this is Mrs. Chen. She ran the library where I spent every summer, Tristan would say. Or Blake, meet Tom. He taught me to fish. I shook hands, made small talk, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of people who clearly loved Tristan and cared about his grandmother. Your husband seems a bit out of his element, a woman named Sarah observed to Tristan when she thought I was out of earshot. He's a city person, Tristan replied, but he's trying. That's what matters. Was I trying? I supposed I was. Despite my initial reluctance, I found myself drawn into conversations, helping to set up tables outside, even getting roped into a game of horseshoes with some of Gran's friends. The party moved to the backyard. As the afternoon wore on, someone had strung lights in the trees, and as evening approached, the effect was magical: warm light filtering through the autumn leaves, the lake visible in the distance, the air filled with laughter and conversation. I found myself standing at the edge of it all, watching. This was so far from my usual world of boardrooms and conference calls, of power plays and carefully maintained professional distance. These people weren't trying to impress each other or gain advantage. They were just together, connected. You look thoughtful. I turned to find Gran beside me, 2 glasses of wine in her hands. She offered me one. Just observing, I said, accepting the glass. Feeling out of place, there was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. I considered lying, then decided she deserved honesty. A bit, I admitted. This isn't my usual environment. I can tell you hold yourself like a man who's used to being in charge, always alert, always analyzing. She sipped her wine. Tristan's told me about you over the years, about how brilliant you are, how successful, how intimidating. He talks about me more than he probably means to, she said with a knowing smile. He admires you, Blake, has for a long time. I didn't know what to say to that, but I wonder, Gran continued, if you've ever let yourself be anything other than impressive, if you've ever let yourself just be. I don't understand. You've built walls, she said, echoing her comment from the night before. I recognize it because I did the same thing after my husband died 30 years ago now. I thought if I stayed busy enough, involved enough in the community, I wouldn't have to feel the loss. But walls don't protect you from pain, Blake, they just lock you in with it. I looked out at the party at Tristan, laughing with a group of his childhood friends, so at ease in a way I'd never been. I don't know how to be any other way, I said quietly. Then maybe it's time to learn, she patted my arm, and maybe my grandson is exactly the right person to teach you. Before I could respond, someone called for Gran to cut the cake. The crowd gathered singing happy birthday, and I watched as this community of people who genuinely cared about each other celebrated one of their own. Tristan found me in the crowd, his hands sliding into mine naturally. You okay? He asked low enough that only I could hear. Yeah, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Yeah, I think I am. Later, after the party wound down and the last guest departed, the three of us sat on the porch. Gran was in her rocking chair wrapped in a shawl while Tristan and I sat on the steps. That was a good birthday, Gran said contentedly. Thank you both for being here, wouldn't have missed it. Tristan replied. Blake, Gran said, making me look up. I'm glad Tristan found you. He deserves someone who challenges him, who pushes him to be better, Gran. Tristan started, embarrassed. Hush, I'm old, I can say what I want. She smiled at me. And you deserve someone who can show you there's more to life than work and walls, someone who can remind you what matters. That night, lying in bed again with Tristan, I found myself speaking into the darkness. Your grandmother is remarkable. She is, Tristan agreed. She's been through a lot, losing my grandfather, raising my dad alone, then helping raise me when my parents weren't around much, but she never became bitter, never closed herself off. Unlike me. You mean? There was a pause. I didn't say that. But it's true, isn't it? That's what she was getting at. I'm closed off, isolated. Tristan rolled onto his side, and I could feel him looking at me, even in the darkness. You're protective, he said carefully. You've learned to rely only on yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing particularly right about it either. Blake, why did you really agree to this whole fake marriage thing? And don't say it was just about the visa. I thought about his question, about the real answer beneath the obvious one, because when you offered I realized I trusted you, and I don't trust many people. I trust you too, he said softly. I have for a long time. We fell silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before, more comfortable, more honest. The next morning, our last day in Canada, Gran asked if we'd walk with her down to the lake. There's something I want to show you, she said mysteriously. The path through the woods was beautiful, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy of autumn leaves. Gran moved slowly but steadily, clearly familiar with every root and rock. My husband and I used to come here every morning, she told us. Before he died, we made a pact that whoever survived the other would keep coming, would keep appreciating this place for both of us. We emerged at a small beach, the lake stretching out before us like glass. Someone had built a bench there, weathered by years of exposure to the elements. He made that, Gran said, running her hand over the wood. The summer before he died, said he wanted us to have a place to sit and watch the sunsets together. We sat, the three of us, looking out over the water. I've learned something in my 80 years, Gran said after a while. Love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I felt Tristan tense beside me, probably worried about where this was going. When I was younger, I thought love meant never being alone, Gran continued, but real love, the kind that lasts. It doesn't complete you, it challenges you, it makes you braver and kinder and more yourself than you could be alone. She turned to look at both of us. I know this marriage of yours Happened quickly. I know there are circumstances around it that maybe aren't entirely conventional, but what I see when I look at you two is possibility. The possibility of something real if you're both brave enough to let it be. Tristan started, but she held up a hand. I'm not asking you to explain anything. I'm just an old woman sharing what she's learned. The rest is up to you. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Now I'm going to walk back slowly and give you two some time alone. Blake, take care of my grandson, and Tristan, take care of yours. She headed back up the path, leaving us sitting on the bench in silence. She knows, Tristan said finally, maybe. Or maybe she just suspects. Does it matter? He turned to face me. Blake, I need to tell you something. This whole thing, the fake marriage, living together, coming here, it's made me realize something. My heart was beating faster than it should. What? I've had feelings for you for a long time, since before any of this started. I never said anything because you were my boss and it seemed inappropriate, and I figured you didn't see me that way. Anyway, he took a breath, but these past 2 weeks pretending to be married to you, it's made me realize I don't want to be pretending. I stared at him, my mind racing. Tristan, I know this complicates everything. I know it's probably the last thing you want to hear, but I had to say it because in 2 weeks we're going back to that immigration office and Officer Williams is going to ask us if our marriage is real, and I'm tired of lying. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it could be real, maybe we could try. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to pull back, to protect myself, to maintain my carefully constructed walls, but sitting there looking at Tristan, at his honesty, his vulnerability, his willingness to risk everything for something that might be real, I felt those walls starting to crack. I don't know how to do this, I said quietly. Relationships. Letting someone in. I've spent so long being self-sufficient that I don't know if I can be anything else. You don't have to change who you are, Tristan said. I'm not asking you to stop being Morrison, brilliant director and force of nature. I'm just asking if maybe there could be room for this too. For us. I thought about the past 2 weeks, about how Tristan had stood by me through the visa crisis, had offered himself up as a solution without hesitation. About how he knew exactly how I took my coffee, which files I'd need before I asked for them, when to push back against my decisions and when to support them, about how natural it had felt sleeping beside him these past 2 nights, about how much I didn't want to go back to sleeping alone. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if I'm not capable of this? What if I hurt you? What if you don't? He reached for my hand. Blake, you're not as closed off as you think you are. Your grandmother was right. You've built walls, but they're not impenetrable. I've seen the cracks. I've seen the person underneath all that armor, and what if that person isn't worth it? Then I'll be the judge of that, he said firmly. But I think he is. I think you're worth it, Morrison. I have for a long time. I looked out at the lake, at the beauty Gran had shared with us, at this place that represented decades of love and loss, and choosing to keep going despite the pain. Okay, I said finally, okay. Let's try, let's see if we can make this real. I turned to face him fully. But I need you to be patient with me. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to fall back into old patterns. I'm going to. He kissed me. It was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand, and I found myself answering, letting myself fall into it, into him, into the possibility of something I'd never let myself want before. When we pulled apart, he was smiling. We'll figure it out together, he said. That's how this works. The flight back to New York felt different. We weren't pretending anymore, weren't maintaining careful distance. Tristan fell asleep with his head on my shoulder, and I let him stay there, feeling the weight of him and realizing it didn't feel like a burden, it felt like belonging. Back at my penthouse, our penthouse now, I suppose, we fell into a new kind of routine. Tristan still worked as my assistant, but now our mornings started with coffee together, and our evenings ended with conversations that went deeper than work. We learned each other in real ways, not just the surface details we'd memorized for immigration. I learned that Tristan sang in the shower badly and enthusiastically, that he had nightmares sometimes about losing people he cared about, a remnant of losing his grandfather young, that he was secretly a romantic who'd given up On finding someone because he'd fallen for his unavailable boss, he learned that I had insomnia most nights, that I actually loved terrible reality TV but would never admit it to anyone else, that my harsh exterior was mostly a defense mechanism I developed after years of being told showing emotion was weakness. Officer Williams did make her surprise visits. She showed up at the penthouse at 7:00 a.m. on a Saturday, finding us having breakfast together in comfortable silence. The newspaper spread between us. She called at random times asking pointed questions about our daily routines. She even interviewed our doorman about our comings and goings. She really is thorough, Tristan said after one particularly invasive phone call. Let her be, I replied, pulling him closer on the couch where we'd been watching TV. We have nothing to hide anymore. 2 weeks after we returned from Canada, we went back to Officer Williams's office. She studied us as we entered, her expression as skeptical as ever. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Hayes, please sit. We sat, and this time when Tristan reached for my hand, it wasn't for show. I've been conducting my investigation into your marriage, she began, pulling out a thick folder. I've made multiple unannounced visits to your residence. I've interviewed your neighbors, your colleagues, your doorman. I've reviewed your financial records, your phone logs, your travel history. She paused, and I felt Tristan's hand tightening mine, and I have to say I'm impressed. If this is a scam, it's the most elaborate one I've ever seen. You two have created an incredibly convincing facade. It's not a facade, I said firmly. Her eyebrows rose. No, no, Tristan confirmed. When we first came to you, we were uncertain about our relationship, but these past few weeks have clarified things. We're not pretending, Officer Williams, this is real. She studied us both for a long moment, then surprisingly she smiled. I believe you, she said, not because your documentation is perfect, though it is, not because you've covered all your bases, though you have, but because in 15 years of doing this job, I've learned to recognize real emotion, and what I see between you two is genuine. She stamped a document and slid it across the desk. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison, your visa is approved. Welcome to America. Permanently this time. Outside the office, Tristan threw his arms around me, not caring who saw. We did it, we did, I agreed, holding him close, though I think we did more than just full immigration. He pulled back to look at me. What do you mean? I think we fooled ourselves into something real. He laughed. Is that such a bad thing? I thought about it, about the walls I'd spent years building, about the isolation I'd worn like armor, about how terrified I'd been of letting anyone in, and then I thought about Grand's bench by the lake, about choosing someone every day, about being brave enough to let something be real. No, I said, kissing him right there on the street. It's not bad at all. 6 months later, we flew back to Canada. This time it wasn't for a crisis or a birthday, but just to visit. Gran met us at the door with the same warm hug she'd given me the first time. There are my boys, she said, beaming. Come in, I want to hear everything. Over dinner, we told her about our life in New York, about the visa approval, about how we'd stopped pretending and started building something real. I knew it, she said triumphantly. From the moment I saw you two together, I knew you just needed a little push to see it yourselves. You're a meddling old woman, Tristan said affectionately. I prefer wise, she corrected, and I was right, wasn't I? That night, we walked down to the lake again, to the bench where we'd first admitted our feelings to each other. Thank you, I said to Tristan as we sat watching the sunset. For what? For pushing me, for being patient, for showing me that letting someone in doesn't make you weak, it makes you braver. He leaned his head on my shoulder. Thank you for letting me in. I know it wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is, I said, echoing Gran's wisdom, but I'm learning that some risks are worth taking, and in this one definitely was. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of Gran's wind chimes. Gentle reminder that we were in a place where love was celebrated, where community mattered, where being vulnerable wasn't a weakness but a strength. I'd started this journey terrified of losing everything I'd built, but what I'd found instead was something I hadn't even known I was Missing connection, partnership, love. Oliver Tristan said quietly, I love you. 3 words I'd never expected to hear, never thought I'd deserve, never imagined I'd be able to say back, but Gran was right, being brave meant taking risks, and some risks, the ones that terrified you most, were the ones most worth taking. I love you too, I said, and meant it with every part of my carefully guarded